Hi, Misha here, and yesterday I put out a video entitled The Force Ghost of Star Wars Past, where I talked about, personal anecdotes growing up with the original trilogies and a little bit about the prequels, but yeah, mostly I just haven't talked to you guys in a while. I felt like doing a black box series and it seemed like a good time. So this video is the Force Ghost of Star Wars Present. How do you like my I'm sure just very clever titling here. But I think it is relevant though. Oh, what could be said about this? I mean, oh Lord, has this kind of gone on probably a lot longer. There's just been so much since Lucas sold to Disney. I will say, the last bit of Lucas's tenure with Star Wars was the Clone Wars, which I didn't really watch at all. I didn't even know if it existed for years. My wife and I haven't had cable or satellite for 10 years. We canceled it. Funny story, and this will play into something I want to say later. Around late 2009, early 2010, we said, well, looking at the bills, and the cable bill kept going up. You know how they do. Introductory rate, $90, you get cable and internet. Then after the first year, it creeps up and up, and next thing you know, you're paying $140. And also, they've taken away your favorite channels or reworked them like they did from sci-fi to sci-fi. That's how my speech says it, by the way, sci-fi. It's like, what the fuck's sci-fi? And of course, history doing its thing. But yeah, we decided, hey, we're gonna cancel our satellite service. We weren't under contract anymore, so we could just cancel it anytime. And then we're gonna revisit in 6 months or have a family meeting and decide if we want to kind of come back to it. Funnily enough, I was more in favor of it than she was at the time, even though I think I probably watched a little more. But neither of us watch more than a few hours a week just because we're busy. Well, what ended up happening, a year goes by, and we realized we never had that talk 6 months ago. Well, that was a clear enough answer for both of us. Yeah, we don't really need TV. Instead, we have a Netflix subscription. Eventually, we got Amazon Prime and Hulu as well. But yeah, so I haven't really been in the TV loop much. I eventually did watch the Clone Wars when my wife was gone visiting her folks, which she usually does about once a year. I guess it was 2013. That sounds right. And at first I was like, what's up with this? Especially season 1, if anyone's seen it. I was like, this is a kid show, I know this, but yeah, what the hey. But I was like, you know what this needs? Booze. So, yeah, I just drank and watched it, and it was a lot more enjoyable. I think between the drinking and the progressing through the seasons, so by the, season 3 or 4, it was pretty damn good. And that was kind of Lucas's last major project I'm aware of. Then he sold to Disney. I get it. Man's got enough money. And he's never seemed too greedy either. I mean, yeah, he wants to make money, but yeah. Sold to Disney, got a little chunk of change. A lot of people said he should have sold for more, but I mean, he had enough and his kids are set for life, and that seems to be it. Disney sinks a lot of money into it and immediately announces a new sequel trilogy in 2013. And we know from the beginning that Lucas gave him an outline and some ideas. So everyone kind of assumes that they're going to go with that. Well, as The Force Awakens draws closer, we hear that they're not using George Lucas's ideas. But we all watched the movie. I went on the premiere with Jay back in 2015 and watched it. And I think everyone knew it was kind of a reboot of A New Hope. The thing is, we'd already seen a reboot from JJ and Bad Robot with the 2009 Star Trek, And I honestly felt like the soft reboot of Star Wars in 15 was more respectful than the 2009 reboot of Star Trek. The Star Wars reboot, if I said Star Trek a minute ago. And by that I mean the Star Trek reboot just wiped everything away. Totally different thing. Now later, of course, they kind of retconned it and did the whole Kelvin versus Prime timeline. But when it first came out, it was just like, okay, Next Generation, Voyager, even the original series, poof, all gone. Great. At least when they rebooted Star Wars, they kept the original trilogy and even the prequels. Also, there were a lot of intentional mysteries set up in that movie. And of course, everyone knows Abrams loves his mystery boxes. Now, I think some people dug a little too deep and found mysteries where none were intended, so I never expected those to get answered. But when you had things like the parentage of the main characters, or why one of the old characters is off on a lark in the middle of nowhere, but left a map, it was obvious that they were leaving things open. And we all presumed, hey, they've got an idea of where this is going. And I don't think we all figured they knew word for word where they were going to go, but we assumed they had an idea. And that they had tentative answers for these questions they'd set up. Okay, cool. So that got us excited. And that's why for 2 years the internet was abuzz with who is Snoke. Although I love when people spell it Snook. I find that hilarious. You know, who are Rey's parents. Whatever. That never really concerned me that much. But yeah, why not? Why did Ben turn to the dark side or whatever he is? That was kind of interesting. Where's Luke? What's Luke doing there? Also, I think the most important thing to come out was, what conditioner does Chewie use? Because, you know, he's got to be like a 100-year-old Wookiee. He's got his fur and everything. So, what's his thing? Is there like, a hair club for Wookiees? Because we need some of that. And then, of course, The Last Jedi came out. Now, coming up to it, yeah, I was, I think optimistic. But I told Jay, apropos, this is a couple of weeks before anything, this is going to kind of make it or break it for me. I said, okay, I'm giving him The Force Awakens as their soft reboot. The new characters are okay. I really didn't hate what they did with Han. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I didn't like what they did with R2 more, honestly. I was like, yeah. But I told him, look, okay, they get that one. Get everyone eased back in, kind of themselves learn how to make a Star Wars movie. First time for Disney, gotta remember. We figured JJ's a fan. And they were already talking about directors and things, so it was, everyone assumed there was an outline. And, okay, different directors, sure. The original trilogy didn't have all the same director. But they had an idea. I said, this will make or break it. Because this is the one where they can really go for it. I think at that time, we were just worried about, are they going to rehash Empire Strikes Back or try to do something clever? And what are some of the answers to Snoke and Rey and etc.? I will say this. Much like Trump in 2016 in his election campaign, the way Rian Johnson did The Last Jedi certainly lit the internet on fire. Love it or hate it, everyone had an opinion. By the way, speaking of opinions, one thing that the internet does today that bugs me is when they intentionally mispronounce names to try to insult someone, like Jar Jar Abrams or Rian Johnson. Now, what's funny about the Rian Johnson thing, yeah, I get it. His name's spelled a little off. So what? A lot of names are. But that's actually how my text-to-speech, my TTS program reads his name, Rian Johnson. I thought it was Rian Johnson for a bit. But once I realized, hey, it's Ryan. Okay, that's his name. Why are you intentionally mispronouncing his name? I don't get that. Why is that an insult? Even if it is, that's such a childish, low-hanging fruit way to insult something. I'm just saying. I don't know. It just bugs me. That's a very common trope on the interwebs now, where people will intentionally just continuously mispronounce or, change the name. Is that, doing it once, fine, I get it, it's a joke, but I don't know, it kind of really bugs me, and it's very childish. I don't know, I think you guys know me, love it or hate it, I still like to give people a certain base level of human respect, if that makes sense. But yeah, Last Jedi. I'm not going to go into it here. I don't want this to be a long video. But... yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that did bug me, even Force Awakens, but we still figured we'd probably get it in the third movie until Carrie Fisher's death, was having all three on screen. The thing is, when you're dealing with people that age, I don't think anyone would have guessed the youngest person would have died, but then again, Carrie, let's say, lived life to the fullest, so it's probably not surprising. But when you're dealing with people that age, take the opportunity when it comes. Get them on screen together, maybe even film some unused footage just in case. Because you never know, Harrison Ford might have had a heart attack or a stroke, or Mark Hamill might have had a mental break and permanently be fixed in his brain as the Joker. Oh, that would be hilarious. Think about it. Mark Hamill, who thinks he's literally the Joker, acting like he's Luke Skywalker. Goddamn, I would see that. And what they did with Luke, I mean, I think everyone, as safe as Force Awakens was, I think everyone just kind of expected The Last Jedi to go safe. On the other hand, I was like, it would be kind of badass if they got to the island and Luke had slipped to the dark side. Because I'm also not one of those people. I loved his scene with the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. That was just great. Throws away the lightsaber. I'm a Jedi, like my father before me. Great. And then, because before that, Yoda tells him he's not a Jedi yet. He says, so I am a Jedi. He goes, no, not yet. So his trial was facing Vader. And really the only Force users in the universe left were in that room. Himself, his father, and the Emperor. And the Emperor, of course, is the highest ranking. So, in the absence of a Jedi Grand Master, when the Emperor says, so be it, Jedi, that's affirmation that Luke is a Jedi. Like, it's one thing for someone to pick up a lightsaber and call themselves a Jedi. But it's very presumptuous. It's hubris. But he was anointed, if you will, a Jedi by the Emperor, by doing exactly what a Jedi would do. And who better to know a Jedi's behavior than the Emperor? And now, obviously, the Emperor scoffed at him, but, there's also a certain respect there. Because if you look at the prequels, you can tell that while the Emperor got exactly what he wanted out of Anakin, his respect level and effort level went way down after he'd converted him. Obviously, it's mostly just because he got what he wanted out of him, but, when you're still trying to woo someone, you have that certain respect for them, or even wariness. So, yeah, that was his, I'm a Jedi. But just because you're a Jedi doesn't mean that's it for the rest of your life. He was a young kid, early 20s. Life keeps going on. It's, Count Dooku was a Jedi for many years past his trials. Anyone can turn. So if Luke had turned to the dark side, even just dabbled in it again, if the reasoning was good, especially kind of like his father, if Rey had come and he was just starting to go down that path, he'd discovered something, that would have been an interesting twist. I would have loved to have seen Mark Hamill play the villain, because we know he can do it so damn well. That said, as far as his acting, I loved Grumpy Luke. I think Mark Hamill acted the hell out of that. It really showed his growth as an actor, because let's be honest, especially in A New Hope, he's not a good actor. And even in Empire, not better. I think in Jedi, he's at the top of his game. But I think it's just a pure acting craft. He did pretty well. But, of course, I disagree with a lot of the stuff that that happened. Dark side or light side, I just don't see Luke cutting off from the Force, but that's just opinion and stuff. I also don't think the overall message of failure being a good teacher is bad. I think, if nothing else, Rian Johnson had an idea behind his film. Cool. But when this is the last hurrah with these people, when you're bringing them back, is that really how you want to do it? Also, the problem with The Last Jedi, nothing happened in the film. It was inconsequential, not only to the original trilogy, but also to The Force Awakens. It just didn't progress the story at all. And it didn't flow from The Force Awakens, the pacing, the tone, the dialogue. It just, I'm not necessarily saying it's bad or good. I'm saying it doesn't link up that well. And I really hated that there was no progression in time. Every other Star Wars movie, time passes. 6 months, a year, 10 years. That's part of how episodic story structures work. And it's okay to skip stuff in the middle. I mean, they could have just gone to a crawl saying that Luke had been training Rey for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, and that would have been alright. I mean, people say Luke had limited training, and I'll agree, but for one thing, we know that Obi-Wan taught him some Jedi exercises. As we see some, we can presume a few others. So, in addition to working for the Rebellion for 3 years between A New Hope and Empire, we can assume he was kind of practicing his Jedi a little bit, because he's able to pull his lightsaber from the snow, so something. And then when he goes to visit Yoda, that's like a crash course. I've taken summer courses back when I was in college. It's amazing what you can cram into 6 weeks or a couple of months when that's what you're doing. And since the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive was broken, I've always liked to think that time period during the montage, remember it was the 80s, some montages were everywhere. I like to think that the Millennium Falcon was kind of cruising through space for a long time, because space is big. And then that left Yoda on Dagobah for a long time. Now, how long? Probably not huge, but a few months maybe? Again, space is really big. Also, that gives Han and Leia just that much more time to romance each other and get down and do the nasty. Now, imagine this. They're in the back. Chewie's sitting up front. Can you imagine the look on his face? Now, there was a fanfic where he was listening in and just wanking off the whole time, which was one of the most disturbing things I've ever read on the internet. So, of course, I had to share it with friends. But, yeah, anyway, small compartment. If anyone's ever traveled with people on, like, a big bus or whatever, and they're getting at it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You don't want to stop them, because that's just not what you do, but, on the other hand, it's really awkward. But, yeah. So I figure Luke had a little training, and plus just, he was trained in the military arts through the rebellion and whatnot. Yeah, okay. And even after Empire, he had about another year to practice what Yoda taught him. Plus, he was in Obi-Wan's old hut on Tatooine, or Tatooine, as he says at the end of Empire. So, we can presume that there were some writings or holocrons or whatever. Okay, not holocrons, I think that's technically Sith. Whatever you call the Jedi version. Books, things, whatever. And obviously, he found something to build a new lightsaber. So, we can kind of, maybe like, kind of an independent study course in Obi-Wan's hut. And there's no reason Obi-Wan couldn't have come and visited him as a ghost. I'm not saying he did, but I'm saying all told, we can kind of figure that he had 4 to 5 years of training at some level. Reasonable expectation. Yeah. And I'll even buy that Rey could have picked up stuff quickly, but I figured based on things in The Force Awakens, there'd be some reason, some at least asset, either forgotten memories or the reincarnation, rebirth of a character, whatever. Nothing. Nothing at all. On the other hand, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, I almost said Cisco, had years of training. He was an adept, and then he had at least a few years under Luke, and then he had at least a few years under Snoke. That guy should be trained to the hilt. Now I get why he lost the saber fight in Force Awakens. He got shot with a fucking Wookiee bowcaster. That's gonna mess anyone's day up. Plus he just laser sorted his dad. I don't care if he wanted to do it. That's gotta be a thing. By the way, I did like how Skywalker said laser sword. That, again, Hamill's individual lines and delivery were great. It's just there was no overall structure. I felt like Johnson wanted to tell something, and he was just handed these characters, and he tried to make them fit in. I honestly think after seeing things like Solo and Rogue One, him being the director of one of those films where he was kind of given his own sandbox to do with as he pleased, would have been so much better. He just didn't need to be in the main saga. It just wasn't what he needed. His talents are elsewhere, and I'm trying to be very objective and fair. So, what about where we're at today? However it worked out, The Last Jedi made it very clear that Lucasfilms under Disney had no overarching plan. And while I think it's really cool to set up mysteries, if you have an answer in mind, it's the height of laziness to set up mysteries with no real idea how they're going to be answered. Because the part of a mystery is just to see how cleverly it can be revealed. I mean, imagine if you watched any of these criminal shows, or heck, the old Murder, She Wrote, whatever, and they never explain how the killer did it. It would just be, because, the part of it is, or for example, I like the old Sherlock Holmes books. The cool part of Sherlock Holmes was his explanation. Or imagine if you didn't get it. Imagine if he just told Watson, Prince Zeiser killed Princess Peach. There he is. Get him. And they arrested him, and that's it. And then, Watson turns to Holmes and goes, "How did you know how he did it?" Holmes shrugs, and then roll credits, and that's it. No, the cool part's listening to him explain. And so I don't think Johnson was the right choice. Also, even before, I never have seen Looper, but I remember, even before I knew he directed it, when I was watching Breaking Bad, that one episode he did with the frickin' fly, I thought the characters in that were acting out of character. I didn't really... Again, the episode itself wasn't bad taken in isolation, but in the whole series, the characters did not behave. Plus, Johnson seems to have this very minimalist, kind of closed off, what they call a bottle episode type format, and The Last Jedi feels that way. I mean, The Force Awakens, and one thing that Abrams does with space stuff that bugs me, and this is something I mentioned a bit earlier, space is big. Like, really, really big. And I don't think J.J. Abrams, in the back of his head, gets how big space is. His space feels small. Like, ships go from point A to point B in 5 minutes. Or people can see things happening on other planets from their planets. I don't think he fundamentally understands. And it's not unprecedented. When the original Star Trek came out in the 60s, a problem they had was educating people on the difference between a galaxy and a solar system. People weren't familiar with space terminology back then, and often it got mixed up. So, I get it if it's not his thing. But in The Last Jedi, it became even more apparent. At least Abrams had a bunch of fighters, big ships, And I could understand if The Last Jedi were kind of a microcosm. Again, if it were a story told in a bigger story, but to say, like, all of the rebellion is 4 ships, capital ships, and less than 100 fighters. And all of the, whatever it's called, Empire, whatever, is, 50 capital ships and 500 fighters. That's tiny. This is a freaking galaxy. Star Wars is a galaxy-spanning thing. Look at the Clone Wars. Even look at the original. Even on the Death Star run in the first film, the one that had the least funding, the Rebels had 36 fighters, and we can presume the Empire had many more ties than that. And then you get to the Battle of Endor, it's epic. And you get to the Clone Wars, and especially Episode 3, it's everywhere. But that's how a galaxy-spanning war would be. I mean, you have, conservatively, how many star systems? 100,000 that they're occupying? So how could any empire or any rebellion worth its salt just have a few ships? Again, if it's like one microcosm, kind of like we saw, one brilliant thing they did with the Empire, we see the Hoth base getting attacked, and we see multiple transports leaving and multiple X-Wings. We kind of are led to believe this is all of the rebellion and that they escaped narrowly, which I think was what Johnson was going for. But at the end of Empire, the Alliance, the Rebel Alliance, rendezvous at the galaxy's edge, or outside of the galaxy. And that's when we start seeing corvettes and frigates, and even, I think, Mon Calamari cruisers are in there. If not, we see a larger fleet, and we realize the Hoth base was a base, not the base. And the thing is, if you're a rebellion, you want to separate out. You want to have multiple places. That's how it works. And of course, any galactic empire, they won't be able to bring their full military to bear, because they're spread out doing the whole galaxy thing. I mean, look at how the USA has been in just the USA. I mean, just the world. We were in Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War. We sent resources there, but it wasn't by no means everything. So, but even with that said, both felt small. This like tiny little insignificant local clashes. It felt diminished somehow. Not personal, which I think was what he was going for. It just felt diminished. I just don't think in a different way Johnson gets how big a galaxy is and how huge a real Star War would be. His felt like a local border skirmish at the edge of a solar system. Either way, at the end of Last Jedi is our real problem. Okay, Luke's kind of eventual thing, I'm okay with. I think his peaceful way of distracting while the rebellion, or whatever you want to call it, got out was pretty cool, honestly. And he got his job done, and that was very Luke, at least in some aspect. He wasn't really a warrior type after he became a Jedi. But yeah, that was fine. But and if they had escaped with several ships, even diminished, but to only escape on the Millennium Falcon as a light transport and say, oh, we've got 20, maybe 30 people left, that's not enough, I don't care who they are, to do any real work. I mean, more Jedi than that escaped Order 66. Yeah. On the other hand, look at the First Order. They didn't come out a hell of a lot better. And after the Supreme Leader is killed, this young kid who's only been a member for a couple of years is now the leader? Okay, and no one's protesting. I get why they made Hux young. They're trying to kind of a thing. I really think, and it's been said by others, it's not my original thought, the way the Empire was handled in the Timothy Zahn Thrawn trilogy was the way to go. Kind of flip the on the head. Go from the rebellion being the hit and run guys to the Imperial Remnant being the hit and run guys. You know, sometimes it's easy to be the aggressor, but when you actually have to have a seat of government and can't just be running around all the time, I think that change in dynamic would have been the way to go. So with that, if the First Order had been more like that, would have been great. But they weren't. They were treated like they were this great galactic empire, and they just weren't. So my point is, as many have said before, Last Jedi ended, for better or worse, and quite to the opposite of Force Awakens, you had no questions. I mean, the only one left was, how can we make a rebellion from the Millennium Falcon's worth of people? And the answer basically is, you can't. You can't. And there's no mystery about Rey's parentage or Snoke or blah 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 anymore. No, not even little teasers. It was a very grounded movie, but no spirit in it. It had a message, I'll give it that, but it didn't have spirit. And so we come to the movie from yesterday. Yay. No one I knew was excited for it. I honestly kept forgetting it was even coming out, which is really weird. But there it is. Rise of Skywalker. I'm going to decompress a little more before really talking on a different video, because this one's long enough. But no one was really excited. I think, for better or worse, it played out about how everyone expected it to. And I'll say this, I think the problem is Disney, really Lucas under Disney. They made this series because they felt they had to. When George Lucas made his 2 trilogies, he had an idea. Of course he wanted to make money, but George Lucas has always been a dreamer. You can tell, listening to him in interviews, he loves his craft. You may not love his end product, like from The Phantom Menace, but say what you will, that man loved that movie, and all his others. He didn't make a movie unless he had something he thought he could say, and he really threw his all into it. Not saying he was always right, but I think money was a distant concern, especially by the time of the prequels. I think that's why he sold the Star Wars franchise for what some consider too little. It wasn't about the money. I think he just wanted people to quit asking if he was ever going to make Episode 7. I think he's a true artist. Now, that isn't to say everyone has to like his art, but he's a true artist. He's also a generally likable guy. And he grew up with science fiction and samurai stuff. He has that sense. And he had a story to tell. Now, everything I just said about George Lucas doesn't apply to Disney. Lucasfilms now, they literally make stuff by committee. And they don't get it. They didn't start off with a story to tell. They didn't have a message to tell. They didn't really have a reason aside from, hey, we bought this, we need to use it. That's clear. They haven't told anything new in 5 films now. I guess I'm in the minority. I really didn't care for Rogue One. Just because it didn't need to be, and it didn't add anything neat. It was just so color by numbers that I just didn't see a point to it. Sorry, getting water. My throat's drying out. Can't imagine why. And Solo, I mean, honestly, could have been fun. That might have been a good one to put Rian Johnson in charge of, frankly, Solo, or even Rogue One. I think he would have done quite well with either of those. I mean, grumpy old Luke, what about asshole young Han? I would have paid money for that. Or just like Randy young Lando. Yeah. They don't have the skill. Okay, so Lucasfilm doesn't have a vision. Fine. That you can get away with that if you know how to pick people that do have a vision. And it's clear now they don't. they picked J.J. Abrams, who loves Star Wars. And is honestly, and this might get a little disagreement, he seems like a reasonably humble guy considering Hollywood. He's certainly not an asshole, I don't think. But he doesn't have a story to tell. And then they pick Rian Johnson, who definitely styles himself as an artiste. He's definitely got a bigger ego. Now, I don't think he's as big of a jackass as people make him out to be. But he's kind of the polar opposite of Abrams, and that's the problem. You can't go from one directing style to the polar opposite and then consider it to be the same trilogy, the same saga. And then, of course, they go back to JJ for this film. Back to playing it safe. And the problem is now, he had to basically, first he set up stuff in Force, and then Last Jedi actually dismantled that and didn't go anywhere by intent, talking about failure. And so with Rise of Skywalker, now JJ has to undo what Johnson did, set new stuff up, or reestablish his existing stuff with like Rey's parentage and Snoke, and then still try to tell a story. So they're working against themselves. It's cross purposes. Not only do they not have a story to tell, they have essentially two horses going in opposite directions, so the cart's gone nowhere. From the beginning to the end of the sequel trilogy, nothing happens. The universe isn't progressed. The only way our characters are progressed is they kill a bunch of them. Nothing happens. Nothing fundamentally changes. It's just wheels spinning. And I think this last film, after all the Jedi stuff, they just gave up. Okay, we have to do it because we said we would. We have to get it out by the end of 2019 because we said we would. It was just like something it was a checklist to get off and get done with. And I think that's going to be bared out in coming months. People say, what can you do with the Star Wars franchise? Everything. It's a galaxy with 20,000 years of history. You can do a lot. A lot. Anyone can be a Jedi. I mean, since if the old Jedi weren't celibate, they weren't routinely popping out babies. So the Force just kind of comes up randomly, like it does for intelligence or athletic skill in our real world. So anyone can be a Jedi. I'm cool with that. There's lots of aliens, and you can always put new ones in. Ships are always a part of it. I mean, that's kind of one of the saving graces of the Clone Wars for a lot of people. You got clones, you got Force users, you got rebel scum, you got treacherous bounty hunters, you've got smugglers. You've got this whole world to play in. And I remember at the beginning of the video, I was talking about how my wife and I canceled our TV subscription. Everything I said about TV going downhill, you can double for movies. I think modern Hollywood is dying or even dead and hasn't realized it yet. Movies have become too big, too bloated. They take too long to make. They're too expensive. They're made by committee. Because they cost so much money, no one can take a risk anymore. So everything has to be as safe as possible. And of course, now they're not making movies anymore because someone has an artistic vision. And they're not even making movies just to appeal to the American box office like, the 80s. A lot of the 80s movies. I'm not going to say a lot of those that were popular had a huge artistic vision, but they were made for a certain audience. Now, they're trying to make a one-size-fits-all movie that'll appeal in America, Britain, Germany, China, Japan, Korea. So when you do that, you have to have a very simplistic plot. The simpler, the better, because are you going to dub it? Are you going to translate it? Even if you do, a lot of nuance gets lost in translation. So the more basic and straightforward the dialogue can be, the better. And at the same time, what doesn't have to be translated are visuals. Models, explosions, fights. So more and more, less is paid to script, dialogue, and more is paid to the superficial, the gloss. And of course, the cost of advertising films has gone way up, which is really stupid in the day of the internet. Again, hearkening back to the 2016 election, look at how much Hillary spent with conventional advertising versus how comparatively little Trump spent with, let's call it alternative exposure and advertising. This is a changing world, and Hollywood hasn't updated, and they keep trying to push this shit on China. They don't want anything of it. They don't want anything of it, because it's not their history, it's not their heritage. It's not meant to speak to them either. It's an American franchise, and those outside of America who like it are those who tend to like American culture. And that's not a bad thing. Just like how in America we have people that are kind of, Anglophiles or Japanese obsessed or whatever. You have people over there that are really into American culture. That's cool. So if they watch a movie from America, they want it to be an American movie. And goddamn was Star Wars that. That was America through and through. Now, did it have influences from elsewhere? Of course. But what makes America is how we blend everything, the melting pot. And Star Wars was a melting pot movie made by a man who loved his craft, made by a man who cared, and it showed. And it had spirit and adventure. And it was a bold new step. It was something quite new. These days, because everyone in Hollywood wants to play it safe, we get reboots, sequels, prequels, and if we're lucky, we'll get a book series turned into a movie series. But where are the new ideas? And the thing is, a lot of new ideas won't work. Some might make modest profit, others might fail. But you have to try. And back when movies could be made for a couple of $1 to $10 million, you could take that risk. Now that a cheap movie is, $100 million, you're not going to find that many people willing to take the risk. Rightfully so. So I think Hollywood is dying, and Star Wars is just yet another symptom. But not the only one, of course. I'm not even bringing SJWs into it. I think to some extent that's kind of a smokescreen. They're trying to bring people into Star Wars who aren't interested. You're not going to tweak a few things in Star Wars and bring people who weren't into it from the beginning into it. They chose early on. It wasn't their cup of tea. The thing is, there were things that I don't care for. Even if they changed them a little bit, I'm not going to watch reality shows. I don't care. They tried that with the History Channel. Oh, let's have kind of a history bent to the reality show. The thing is, I don't like that format. And the thing is, the Star Wars format, I don't care if you put women or a transgender person or whatever in the lead role. If you don't like the format, you don't like the format. And if you do like it, does it matter what's hanging between the person's legs? It shouldn't. I mean, hell, Luke is asexual. The only person he's ever attracted to in the 40 years of Star Wars is his sister, which is, let's not get into that. Unless you're into that kind of thing. In which case, you know what? You're still a sick bastard. I'm usually pretty open-minded, but Jesus Christ. And, yeah. So that's kind of my present on Star Wars. I've just ceased to care. Part of it is age. But at the same time, I still get drinking a few times a year and will watch the original series, original trilogy, and if I'm feeling particularly goofy, even the prequels. Even those. I've watched Force Awakens 3 times, maybe. I've watched The Last Jedi twice. The only reason I watched it twice is I fell asleep the first time, so I needed to go back and try it again. So maybe 1.5 times is more apt. I don't know. Rise of Skywalker, again, I'm blind. It confuses me and gives me a headache. There's just not... It's so fast-paced, it exhausts me, those kinds of films. And the dialogue is so choppy. I don't know. But that I have a lot. I could say that about a lot of modern movies. So it's not its inherent problem. So yeah, that is my Ghost of Star Wars present video. Kind of my general thoughts on where it's at today. So in the next one, I'll talk about where I think it can go in the future, and I think that'll be a more fun, more open video. But I appreciate you tuning in. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. All that good stuff. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.